This engine came in after the owner said it had started running really rough and wouldn't idle properly. The mechanic pulled ahead and found a few of the valves had snapped clean off and welded themselves into the combustion chamber, and the pistons had taken some heavy damage too. The owner of this car came in pretty confident that it was just a minor boost issue. The mechanic opened the hood and found the intake manifold had blown itself completely wide open. This mechanic had the transmission out and was just lowering it down on the jack when the jack decided it was done for the day and took the whole transmission straight to the floor with it. Luckily, someone had left the pallet right where it needed to be. This car rolled in for a routine oil change, and the mechanic hadn't even gotten it through the garage door before he noticed something was up with the suspension. Customer states, "There's a bit of a draft in the back seat, but I think it's just a bad door seal." The owner of this car rolled in saying it had a misfire that had been getting worse for a few weeks, and when the mechanics pulled the ignition coils, every single one of them was sitting in a pool of oil. Customer came in saying that the car had started making a little ticking noise a few weeks ago, and she had just been turning the radio up, but now the volume doesn't go any higher and the car won't start anymore. This truck had apparently been running on the same air filter since the Bush administration. The owner of this car was absolutely certain that the front end work that his stepdad had done was solid. The mechanic grabbed the wheel and found the lower control arm was barely attached to anything. And this customer was doing his own tire rotation when the last wheel came off a little faster than expected. This pickup truck rolled in because the owner said he had just bought it from a friend 2 days before for $6,900 and wanted a thorough inspection. This customer came in saying that one of the car doors had started feeling like one of them saloon doors in a western after he had borrowed the car to his neighbor for a few weeks while he was out of town. And this mechanic was doing an oil change in this customer's car when the oil came out looking like something you'd pay $12 for at a juice bar. Customer states, "Steering feels a little floaty, but my uncle said that's just how these older car models drive." And this is how you know the tire pressure warning light has been on for a little longer than just this morning. The owner of this car had been on her way to pick up groceries when she noticed the brake pedal going a little deeper than normal. Turns out the rear drum brake had been quietly leaking for quite a while, and the rust had gotten so bad there wasn't much of a drum left anymore. This customer came in saying that they had hit what looked like a huge corn dog on their way to work this morning and wanted the mechanics to have a look. Customer states, "Engine's been a little loud lately after my cousin did a full tune-up on it last month, and ever since last week it doesn't start or even crank at all anymore." The owner of this car rolled in saying that his truck won't move even though the engine is running, it's in gear and the drive shaft is spinning, and this is what the mechanic found. This car rolled in because the customer said the ride had been feeling a little rough lately and that they had just gotten the car back from a buddy who had done some work on it. The mechanic got underneath and found this. This is how you know it's just the right time to stop pretending that you just need some new brake fluid. And this one came in running really rough, and it didn't take long to figure out why. Whatever was sitting in that exhaust port had been in there long enough to choke the engine out completely. Customer states, "My engine made a really loud sound last Tuesday, kind of like a boink, and then went quiet. I think the muffler might have fallen off." And this customer came in saying that whenever he accelerates fast, his car goes meow. The owner of this car had been trying to get a new battery installed for about an hour before he figured out what was wrong. This customer had been to 2 different shops over the past few months, trying to figure out why the check engine light kept coming on. Neither shop could figure out the issue, but turns out that it actually wasn't that big of a deal. The mechanic who got underneath this one didn't even need a diagnostic tool. Just a hammer and a little patience, and the frame started answering every question on its own. And this mechanic found a spindle situation that he had genuinely never seen before in his career, and the wheel bearing behind it wasn't feeling too great either. The mechanic who got into this one found the floor mats completely coated in white wax, and a dashboard that had apparently been working extra as a spa retreat for quite some time. Customer states, my buddy fixed the rattling under the car last weekend. Cost me a 12-pack and a couple cigarillos. Best money I ever spent. This truck had apparently been to a shop about 8 months prior for some fresh brake pads, and the customer was very confident that the brakes were basically brand new. The mechanic pulled the first wheel and found the rotor looking like this. And this is exactly how you know that whoever owned this Tundra before was a very creative person, because they kept inventing interesting solutions to every single problem they ever encountered. And this is exactly why you don't ignore a timing belt that's been installed a bit too recklessly. Customer states, I keep all my car repair bills in a special folder in the back seat. It's organized my way. The mechanic walking around this car noticed straight away that one of the rear tires was sitting at a pretty suspicious angle. He got underneath and found the rear lower control arm had rusted through and snapped completely off its mount. The owner of this car came in saying he just needed new wiper blades and figured he'd get a tire rotation done while he was at it. The mechanic grabbed the first wheel to pull it off, and it came off a little easier than expected. Customer states, the brakes have been making a little sound here and there, but she still stops. I think it's just surface rust from the rain. The owner of this car had been on his way to a buddy's place when the engine started making a new sound and then stopped making any sound at all. The oil pan underneath had a hole in it, and it turns out that the oil had moved out quite a while ago. The mechanic who walked up to this car found a stack of wheel spacers that looked less like an aftermarket upgrade and more like a geometry experiment, and the body kit wasn't making anyone feel more safe going along for a ride. Customer states, electric window won't roll down. I barely used the truck only to go out to the range with the boys, so not sure what could be causing it. And this mechanic had pulled the splash guard off for a routine inspection and got a little more than he bargained for. And this car came in with some electrical issues after the owner's brother-in-law had done some wiring work on it. The mechanic held up the harness and found some of the wires had turned themselves into spaghetti. Looks great. This Holden Commodore came in for a clutch replacement, and when the mechanic dropped the transmission, the pressure plate had apparently already decided to do the hard part for him. The mechanic who got underneath this one found a transmission that had been on a late night bender together with the frame and exhaust, and it looks like they might have had one drink too many. The owner of this car came in saying that the engine had started making a deep knocking sound a few weeks back, but his uncle had listened to it and told him it was probably just some debris stuck in the undercarriage. The mechanic working on this truck found a pretty ambitious rust repair project underneath. Fresh welds everywhere, metal patches on top of metal patches, and the kind of work where you can tell someone tried very hard to keep it on the road for just a little bit longer. Customer states, ran it a little hot on the highway last week, but I let it cool down and she fired right back up later the same day. Probably nothing serious, right? This car came in for a routine brake inspection after the owner had been telling everyone at work that the grinding sound was just the way rear brakes sound on older cars. The owner of this car rolled in because he said he only needed a tire rotation because he was going on a longer road trip soon. When the mechanics told him to think twice about driving a car like that longer distances, the customer just rolled away. And this is what happens when you let your engine run on a low-fat diet. Customer states, car's been pulling a little to the right lately, but I think the road is just uneven. They don't fix potholes like they used to when I was young. And this car rolled in for a routine inspection when the mechanic grabbed the rotor and found it doing things a rotor really shouldn't be doing. The owner of this car came in saying she had a squealing noise from the engine and was sure it was just a loose belt. The mechanic grabbed the water pump pulley and rocked it around, and the belt was the least of her problems. Customer states, car wouldn't start this morning, so my older brother came over and put some new coils in. She fires up now but runs a little uneven. Can you take a quick look at it? This car came in for an oil change when the mechanic got underneath and found the drive shaft having the time of its life dancing around down there. Customer came in saying, yeah, I brought the lawnmower in too. Figured you could change the oil on both while you're anyways at it. The mechanic working on this car found the alternator mount had snapped clean off at some point and that it had been repaired with a generous amount of JB weld. This car had been leaving a little signature on every driveway it parked in for quite some time, and the owner had apparently just assumed it was not from him. Customer states, my buddy just did the front end and said everything is tighter than tight. I just want a second set of eyes on it to be sure. And this guy got a flat tire on his way to see his girlfriend and figured he could sort it out himself in the parking lot. Let's just hope he's better with the ladies than what he is with cars. The owner of this Dodge came in saying it had started to sound a little more muscular lately and just wanted to make sure everything was okay underneath. And this is what an engine looks like when it has a very bad day and decides to vent it out with the oil pan. Customer states, just had a side exhaust put on and it sounds amazing. There's just a tiny bit of smoke on startup. Is that normal? The owner of this car rolled in saying that the brakes make a sound but they work fine and that he just needs to check the rear drums because his father-in-law said they might need new shoes. Uh-oh. This mechanic was just doing some routine maintenance on this customer's car when he saw that a scissor jack had been hitching a free ride in the engine bay. This car came in because the customer had some major brake issues. The mechanic pulled the wheel off and found that the outer ring and the center of the brake rotor were no longer on speaking terms. The mechanic who opened the coolant lines on this one stepped back pretty quickly. What poured out looked less like coolant and more like something you'd find at the bottom of a forgotten slow cooker. The owner of this car came in saying it felt sluggish and he thought the nitrous setup he'd installed might need adjusting. The mechanic had a look and found 3 nitrous tubes sitting in the passenger footwell, not connected to a single thing but the customer's imagination. Hey man, if it works for you, it's all good. Customer states, battery light came on for a second last week, but then it went away, so I figured it sorted itself out. The mechanic who removed the oil pan on this car found something that had absolutely no business being in there. This car rolled in after the owner said he heard a loud pop on the highway, but kept driving because only 2 of the 4 tires blew, so he figured the odds were still 50-50 that he'd make it home in one piece. And this is exactly how you know that the last time someone popped the hood was probably when all members of Lynyrd Skynyrd were still alive. The owner of this BMW came in saying the suspension felt a little bouncy after his neighbor had done some work on it over the weekend to calibrate the handling. This customer rolled in saying that his car has started to feel a bit wonky lately, but he always washes it once a week and it doesn't have any surface rust whatsoever. And this Dodge Journey had apparently been through the hands of someone who treated bodywork the way most people treat a grocery list, just kept adding to it and never crossing anything off. And this oil pan came off looking less like an oil pan and more like an automotive archaeology exhibit. Engine parts, black oil, and the kind of goo that tells you the engine had been trying to say something for a very long time. The mechanic working on this one didn't quite know where to start. No front spoiler, a pretty beat up rim, and loose wires hanging everywhere in the engine bay. Someone had been very busy, and not in a good way. This car came in after the owner said all the electrics had suddenly cut out while driving on the highway. The alternator belt was sitting in pieces in the engine bay, the alternator pulley had snapped clean off, and the alternator itself had decided it was time for retirement. Customer states, I only put top shelf premium oil from Walmart in this puppy, but somehow it's still knocking. When she says that, she's had bigger ones before, so you improvise a bit. The owner of this car came in saying he'd heard a bang from underneath and then the car had started driving strangely. Turns out the drive shaft had come loose, picked a fight at everything nearby, and had spun out oil absolutely everywhere. This truck had been making a set of weird squeaky and badunka-dunka noises for a while before anyone decided to take it seriously, and this is what the mechanic found when he pulled the oil pan. Customer states, I've got this strange whining sound from the front, but I haven't had any issues with the tires since I bought the car new, about 10-11 years ago. The owner of this car had been on his way home from a summer road trip when he noticed the front end of the car smelled a little strange. The mechanic put it up on the lift and found the front spoiler and headlight surrounds had partially melted off the car. The mechanic working on this car reached in to start uninstalling the clutch and found the flywheel spinning freely before he'd even touched a single bolt. Customer came in saying that a friend of his has recently started a car restoration shop and that they're quite new with working on cars, but that he believes in them and let them touch up his car for him. And sometimes the oil changes come with a free taste test. The owner of this car said that he couldn't get the seats to bend over. The mechanic said that it was the quickest $250 he'd ever made. The owner of this car had been on his way to a fishing trip with some friends when the car started making a gurgling sound. The mechanic pulled the exhaust off and a small river came pouring out. This mobile mechanic was called in because the customer had a pretty bad oil leak that he had tried repairing by himself, but without much luck. Customer states, she's got lots of personality. Previous owner was very hands-on with her, but I think that adds to the charm. And this car came in with an intermittent cooling fan issue that the mechanic spent a while chasing around until he found one of the connectors having a little solo improvisation going on. And this customer had invented his very own way of making sure the engine didn't overheat, using a kitchen thermometer. The owner of this car had been driving around on what he described as a slowly deflating tire for about 3 weeks, convinced there was a nail in it somewhere, and had already bought a plug kit, a portable compressor, and a new spare before bringing it in. This is how you know a turbo has decided it's done with this world and everything in it. This customer came in saying that the dealership had just done a full service on her car and that it was driving perfectly now. The mechanic popped the hood and found the coolant bone dry, a brand new master cylinder already weeping fluid, and an oil leak they'd apparently decided wasn't worth mentioning. And this is exactly why you don't over-tighten the oil cap after every oil change. This mechanic was working this tire a little too well, and it decided to show its appreciation. This car rolled in after the customer said he drove over a golf bag while in a rush to get home from golfing with his friends. The owner of this car came in absolutely convinced there was a major fault with the rear center console, saying it had been stuck in the wrong position for weeks and that the previous shop had no idea how to fix it. And this customer had his brother-in-law help him sort out the drivetrain a few weekends back, but came in saying it had developed a clunk that was getting worse every day. And this customer came in saying, "Parked on the grass last night and now the car won't move. Could be a flat maybe?" Customer states, "Nephew borrowed the car for a move last weekend, said everything went fine, but I got it back like this." This car came in because of a brake issue the owner had been putting off for a while. The mechanic found the rotor and then found that one of the brake hoses had snapped clean off, which explained why the brake pedal had been feeling a little more free-spirited than usual. Customer came in saying that his car gets a little hot sometimes, but once he turned the heat on full blast it cools right down and wanted to know if that was normal. The mechanic who pulled this F-250 into the bay found a long list of issues. Wheels a bit too wide for the truck, wiring that looked like it had been done during a power outage, and a steering wheel that had a free roam setting turned on by default. This shop had just spent over 100 hours renovating this Cat diesel and went to fire it up for the first time when things took an unexpected turn. Customer states, "Need coolant topped up. Also, I know the brake light is on, but it's been on for 2 years and the car still drives and stops fine." And this guy rolled in saying he hit a small curbside on a Target parking lot. Must have been a titanium curbside. The owner of this car had his little brother, who's an apprentice at a local garage, tune his engine a little by installing some high-performance ignition coils, and this is the result. Customer states, "I've had a clunking sound from the front for about 8 months and figured it would stop on its own eventually, but it's just getting worse and worse." And this is exactly why you don't let your nephew rebuild a truck engine in the front yard after watching a 3-part YouTube series on it over the weekend. The lifters came out looking like they'd been installed by someone who was maybe a little too confident going in. The owner of this car came in saying that their steering has felt a little loose ever since they drove through a large puddle that turned out to be a deep pothole. This car rolled in after the customer's best friend and neighbor had apparently done some suspension work on it a few weeks prior, and the mechanic got underneath to find the shock absorbers looking like this. And this mechanic popped the hood on a pretty routine inspection and found an engine mount that someone had apparently decided to fix with a can of expanding foam. When you have a trouble deciding on what you want to be in life, so you sprinkle a little bit of everything in there. The owner of this car came in saying that he had benched it on a dyno not too long ago after a total engine rebuild, but that he forgot to add the correct amount of engine oil and the engine totaled itself about halfway through the test. And this customer came in for a routine tire rotation when the mechanic flipped the wheel around and found a crack running through the inner barrel that had apparently been there for quite a while. Customer states, "Swapped in a new radiator last weekend. Runs great, but it rattles a little at idle. Is that normal?" And sometimes, you just gotta have a little faith in the Lord and Jesus that you have enough gas in the tank that you'll make it home in one piece. Uh-oh. The owner of this truck had come in saying that the brakes were making a bit of a crunching sound, and when the mechanic pulled the wheel, he found that someone had gotten pretty creative with the brake pads. The owner of this car had been chasing an alternator problem for weeks, and had apparently called in a favor from a neighbor who's apparently pretty good with electronics. The mechanic got to the battery, checked the voltage, and then touched the alternator and watched the numbers go absolutely all over the place. Customerstates hit a huge swan garden sculpture while backing out of the driveway really fast because I was late for work. And this is exactly how you know that it might be time to stop blaming the cold weather for all that smoke. Customer came in saying that there's quite the draft coming from the floor whenever he drives on the highway. And this one rolled in with a wobble the owner said had been going on for a few days, and when the mechanic got to the front axle, the tire had long since given up and was just hanging onto the rim for moral support. This customer came in saying that he has to plan ahead when braking because it takes a while for the car to stop. I wonder why. And sometimes the floor jack reminds you that car work can have some pretty serious consequences. This car rolled in because the owner had a really strange noise coming from the front at all speeds, even though he had tried taking care of it all by himself using some industrial grade lube. Customer states, my AC stopped working and the battery light came on. Might be the compressor and the battery cables. The belt should be fine, I changed it myself last month. The mechanic working on this one cracked open the oil filter and found it absolutely packed with metal shavings, which is basically the engine's way of writing its own "thank you for our time together" letter. The owner of this Volvo had apparently been topping up the coolant by himself for the past couple of years and was pretty confident he had been using the right stuff. And this is exactly what happens when a car has been in one too many minor incidents that the owner forgot to mention when he dropped it off. And this car came in because the owner complained about a loss of power and that the car pulls slightly to one side when accelerating while making a strange whining sound, and this is what the mechanics found. The mechanic working on this truck went in to check a clunking complaint and found leaf springs that were a bit cranky. Customer states, my buddy rebuilt the whole drivetrain for me and sorted out the clutch for a 12-pack and a bottle of Jack. But I'm not sure if he drank it before or after working on the car, because I have a problem getting it in gear now. And sometimes, the other shop actually does a decent job for once. The mechanic who got underneath this one found a custom exhaust installed in red, which was a pretty sporty choice. Even sportier was the decision to point it straight at the gas tank for that ultimate boom effect. And some people's good enough sometimes really does look like this. This truck rolled in because it sometimes wouldn't start, especially after the car wash. The mechanic spent a good 10 minutes checking the battery, the fuel system, and just about everything else under the hood before he looked down at the floor. And this mechanic had decided he was done having slippery and dirty shoes at work and built this, using an old jigsaw and a couple brushes. The owner of this car had apparently been telling himself that the clunking was probably just some gravel in the wheels or maybe just a tiny bit of play in the ball joint. The mechanic found the lower control arm looking like this. And this is exactly what happens when you trust your nephew who says he knows everything about cars and can help to fix that coolant leak for you for cheap, but accidentally ends up pouring things into the wrong hole. Customerstates found these cool looking lug nuts on Temu, and they had free shipping, so I went for a whole set. But they're darn hard to get off. Please advise. The owner of this car was apparently convinced that if a warning light hasn't come on, nothing can possibly be wrong, so he just wanted the oil and filter change. The mechanic got underneath the car and found the undercarriage looking like this. The owner of this Acura came in because it wouldn't start. Apparently, he had noticed a small coolant leak under the hood and patched it up with an old rag and some tie wraps, but it had just ended up creating an even bigger issue. And this differential had definitely seen some better days. The owner of this truck came in saying that his AC has started to rattle a lot at all speeds because his 6-year-old son's favorite thing to do on longer drives is pretending that the air vent is a vending machine. And this customer rolled in saying that he had borrowed his car to his wife for the very last time.